All right, welcome back. I don't know where JP is. He must be running around, but I know we have Logan Paulsen on, JP's partner for the pregame show every week. And Logan, of course, wants to promote his IG, his Instagram. Give everybody your Instagram out there, Logan, so people can follow you.
Logan_Paulsen82. So thank you for bringing that up. Appreciate it.
No, of course. Let's get that out of the way. Make sure everybody's following Logan on the gram. All right, so they finished 7-9. Before we kind of globally look at this team, let's talk about that game yesterday. Clearly, it didn't seem like Doug Peterson had a super interest in winning that game. But what are you going to do? When they took Hurts out, Washington was still ahead, so I have some pride in that. How do you feel about the way the game played out last night?
Well, first off, let me just say congratulations to the Washington football team. I think it's awesome for the team. I think it's awesome for the city, and everyone talks about like whether it's real or not, and I think that doesn't really matter. Like, it's really, really hard to get an opportunity to even go to the playoffs. So first off, let's get that out of the way. Really happy for them and that group. Obviously, yesterday that game was really hard to watch. I think, obviously Philadelphia, like you said, didn't seem to have any interest or desire to win the game. I got the vibe they were kind of treating it like a third or fourth preseason game. I felt like they were resting their starters a little bit. And then, in addition, they were kind of evaluating quarterback talent, which is their prerogative ultimately. Like, they have nothing to play for. This game is meaningless for them. But it just felt a little odd to me. Like, I don't think I've ever seen that happen to that extent in the last game of a season. Like, over the course of my career, I don't think I've even ever heard of anything like that. So it was a little jarring, obviously, to see that. And I think the other thing that was a little frustrating is that despite kind of Philly's lack of interest in winning the football game, like, the Washington offense specifically looked like they were struggling a little bit. There were times that the defense struggled. So I was hoping to kind of leave this game thinking, the team played like a nice C+ offensively, and the defense played the way that they've been playing. But I didn't really come out of the game feeling that way, so I don't feel like there's a ton of optimism to be built from this game specifically. But I think if you look at the aggregate of the season, I think you could say, well, this team is trending in the right direction, and they might be able to give Tampa Bay some issues in the playoff game next week.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, you played in this league a long time, Logan. You know that from week to week, you know, there's not always carryover, right? I mean, you can look great one week and awful the next. So I think at the end of the day, it was a difficult spot for them. You had to find a way to get the win, to close the deal. They did it, and now it's a new week. And obviously Tampa has their own challenges, and they're going to be huge dogs. But there are some bright spots for this team. I mean, they do struggle offensively. They have a hard time putting points on the board. But, man, you know, we were talking about it. If you look at what McLaurin did, I mean, McLaurin, would you have bet that he would have 87 catches or whatever he had this year? Would you have bet that, Logan Thomas, what do you have, over 70 catches this year?
Yeah.
I mean, there are some pieces. Antonio Gibson really started to evolve, I think, as a running back when he was healthy over the second half of the season. So that there are some building blocks there on the offensive side of the ball.
No, I think that's 100% right. I don't think, maybe people take my criticisms, or criticisms maybe a strong word, maybe like looking at the kind of context of the season and say, oh, I'm being critical of the team. Like, I think where they're at right now in every facet is totally unexpected, and a large piece of that is kind of the emergence of some of these players. Obviously, Terry McLaurin has been a big part of this team since he arrived, basically. He's been very productive and, over 1,000-yard season this year and really fantastic job. And then Logan Thomas, a guy who's been a little bit of a journeyman, a guy with tremendous potential, and then to see him actualize that, I think was really cool. And then for them to hit on a guy like Gibson, in the third round, a guy who was converted wide receiver, like, props their front office and their scouting department for making the right assessment of him and then using him the right way. I think a lot of fans were frustrated with his lack of use early in the year, but it seemed like they brought him on at the appropriate pace because it didn't get too much for him, and he kind of grew as the season went, which is always great to see. And then you talk about offensively, the O-line has kind of come together in a nice way. Brandon Sheriff was number 4 Pro Football Focus guard in the NFL. Like, that group, and, Morgan Moses is like the number 7 right tackle. So, that group's been playing at a pretty good level for a bunch of guys that everyone was kind of being really critical of early in the season. And, we've talked about all these other guys, but we haven't talked about McKissick, a guy who's like second in receiving for running backs, which is really unprecedented. So there are definitely really bright spots for this offense, I think, moving forward. I think obviously, like with every team, there's issues and things that need to be fixed and things that could be improved on. But, from what this roster looked like at the beginning of the year to now, I think it's a vast improvement. And Ron Rivera and Scott Turner deserve a ton of credit.
Talking to Logan Paulsen, former Washington football team tight end, who does film breakdowns on Instagram. You can follow him at Logan_Paulsen82. We got into this heated debate yesterday in pregame with Grant Paulsen, and I don't want to resurrect the debate as it pertains to the New York Giants. You believe the New York Giants defense is better than Washington's defense, but let's talk about Washington's defense because you believe it's maybe slightly overrated. Why do you believe that?
So, I got to put like a modifier on it. I think the New York Giants defense is good. I think they're underrated. And I think the Washington football team defense is slightly overrated in the sense I think they're a good group. I think when if I was preparing for this, oh man, this front is going to be problematic, On the back end, they've improved over the course of the season. I think they're a good defense, but I think everyone kind of has this inclination to anoint them as the best defense in the NFL. They're the second coming of the Bears or the 2000 Baltimore Ravens, and I think they're a good group. I think they have a ton of potential, and I think just like with the offense, I think there's some guys who've grown and matured in a really nice way. But I think
what are the weaknesses that you see in particular, Logan? I know sometimes you think the pass rush maybe is a little bit overrated, even though they have these big names that offensive lines can actually hold their own against them.
Right. Yeah, well, I think a little bit of it, they can be negated because it's one kind of outstanding position group can be negated by game plan, and I think they don't have anybody who has over 10 sacks on the team, even though they've got all these guys with big names, and I think you look at Chase Young, I think he's going to be a fantastic player, and I think he's going to be a multi-time Pro Bowler. I think it was a good pick, but if you look at his production this year, a little bit of the reason he's getting to go to the Pro Bowl is because he's the second overall pick, right? If you look at the backup defensive lineman for his name's Sweat for the Philadelphia Eagles, they have the same number of sacks, they have the same number of tackle for losses. The other guy has more forced fumbles, actually. So it's. I think everyone kind of looks at these names and really projects them in. I don't want to sound like I'm being critical of them because I think they're good players. I think they're going to be good players for a long time. But I think the other thing that really kind of jumps out to me is when they have to make a play. In terms of stopping the run, they seem to have a really hard time doing that. And again, good defenses I've been a part of or I've played against have the ability to kind of say, hey, you know what, you're not going to run the football or you're not, they have the ability to take away one facet of your game. And because this team seems to be so built to stop the pass in a weird way, they do really well against teams that want to throw the ball all over the yard and not so well against teams that are say, hey, we're going to kind of put you in a phone booth and lean on you a little bit and see how you respond. And so to me, that's the thing that kind of jumps out to me a little bit is I don't like that they can't, even yesterday there was some runs against Philly. I think, the total run average was 3.3 or 3.5 yards to carry, but there are times where there just seems to be so much space in the defense. And it makes me a little nervous because good defenses, you don't see that kind of space against the run normally, right? And that's against a bunch of backup offensive linemen, the backup running back, a backup quarterback. They don't have any of their starting receivers, so you're not worried about blowing the top off. So I'm of all the things to kind of be ready for and prepared for, wouldn't you kind of make sure that was a non-issue, kind of totally negate that aspect of the game? So and, my buddy Grant, I talked to him. Go ahead.
I was going to say, so I threw out kind of the grasper narrative this week for Washington fans to you. I think it was during a commercial break yesterday, and I said, well,
yeah,
Tampa might actually be prime for an upset in that they've been winning all these games and putting all these points, but against lesser teams like the Atlanta Falcons, and they haven't beat any winning teams. And Tom Brady has always, I wouldn't say always, but his struggles have been against great pass rushes and great front fours, and maybe Washington can get after Tom Brady, and you weren't buying what I was selling.
Well, okay, so let me just say this. I think the Tampa Bay Buccaneers are a really good offense. If you look at their skill position players, they're really outstanding. I think it looks like a Pro Bowl roster. And then the thing that makes them really dangerous is that when they've had to run the football, they can run the football. And that's the thing that makes me nervous. If they were running an offense comparable to what Pittsburgh was running, where they kind of saying we have no interest in running the football. We're just going to kind of dink and dunk you down the field. I would feel like the defense would perform much better because they've seemed to have handled those types of people very well. But the fact that the Tampa Bay offense has this ability with Jones and Fournette to some extent and McCoy to run the football when they have to, like if I'm the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, I'm going to look at this season and say, you know what, like we're going to kind of come out and have a lot of heavy run action, do some play action stuff. Like we're not going to let that front impact the game. It's a game plan that's going to look much like the St. Louis or the LA Rams and the New York Giants. And so if and when the Tampa Bay Buccaneers throw, you're right. They do get into these 5-7 step drops, really deep drops. They really stress their O-line, and Tom Brady doesn't move the same way. But if I am an offensive coordinator in the NFL and I've watched these games and I'm preparing for a playoff game, like I know that this defense can be handled through an effective running game and through solid play action stuff, which Tom Brady's really good at. So to me, that's what I'm kind of like, maybe they can be competitive, but I would think, like we've talked about on the show a whole bunch of times, the game plan can negate that defensive line, and that's the jewel of that defense. So
hey, let me ask you, as a guy who's played in the league, if you were playing on Washington right now, and you were on the sidelines or even on the field in that first half when the Eagles take the lead, are you thinking maybe that Alex Smith should be pulled?
I don't think I would ever think. I mean, it's hard for me to say that because I've watched enough film of this team this year to know what he does for you offensively and know that anybody else on the roster, we haven't seen Heinicke. We've seen him in a very limited, very specific sample size. And I say, of all the quarterbacks that have played this year, maybe Kyle Allen, but he had such a small sample size also, 2 games, that Alex Smith gives you the best chance to win. And he's proven that over the course of the season. Just not because he's got this amazing kind of talent that's going to like wow everybody and make defenses play scary, but just because he knows where to go with the football and he puts you in good spots. And as a player, like I'm sure, like in that locker room, Alex Smith is renowned as being a good leader. I'm sure guys respect him. I'm sure guys understand his process. And when a quarterback in the NFL prepares and has the level of professionalism that Alex has been purported to have, it just makes you kind of believe that he's going to get you in a good spot. And looking at the game in hindsight, that was 100% correct.
I mean, it's just amazing that these are the quarterbacks who are ranked below him in quarterback rating, old school quarterback rating. Drew Lock, Dwayne Haskins, Carson Wentz, Sam Darnold. I mean, he's at the bottom of the barrel when you look at all of these stats, but you're right. I guess it gives them the best chance to win. They're 5-1 with him under center.
Yeah, and and we've talked about this too. Like I don't think wins should be competitive to the quarterback. I think it's a team statistic, but I do think his stats he does a lot of things that don't show up on a stat sheet really well. Like, everyone gives him a hard time for checking the ball down, but for him to get through his progression so quick and get the ball to where it needs to go, I think that's invaluable, especially to a team like this, because it keeps you out of bad second down situations, which allows you to be more effective in second down situations because you have more of your playbook open to you, and it allows you to be more effective on third down. So I think even those little things, which never show up on any type of stat sheet, or it won't, are really important to keep in mind when talking about Alex Smith's game. He just does a really good job of not putting you in a bad spot. And yesterday he had a tough time. He threw 2 interceptions, but that's kind of a little bit of the history kind of dictates that was probably going to happen, because if he comes in after a long layoff, he looks a little bit rusty. So hopefully he knocks some of the rust off this week and looks good versus Tampa Bay.
Here's the thing. I understand why people don't like to ascribe wins to quarterbacks, but when the contrast is so stark with Alex, at some point you have to say he is the difference. Right? When Alex has started, I don't have the numbers in front of me. They've changed since I last did the sort of the breakdown. But there's something like 11-4 when he's starting, and like 6-30 or something when he's not. When it's that big a contrast, at some point you have to give the guy credit for being the difference.
Well, I think you look at the other quarterbacks on that list that you mentioned, like how many of those guys are NFL starters or even going to be in the NFL in a couple of years, and I think there's very few. I don't know if Kirk Cousins falls into that category, but
no.
That team when he was so I think if you look at the quarterbacks that have played in his absence. I think Mark Sanchez, Josh Johnson, or whatever that guy's name is from San Diego.
Yeah.
Like those guys are no longer in the NFL. And if you look at the guys this year, Haskins is out, and maybe not to return. Heineke, Allen, all of these guys, like they're journeymen, kind of a ragtag bunch. And I think, as much as Alex is limited, he has a ton of experience, and he's got a great head on his shoulders, and you can tell he just knows how to play the position, and he's not going to play outside of himself, which I think is really cool. It's really cool to see, and I think it should be. It's kind of in a weird way, it's changed my perspective on evaluating quarterbacks. Everyone talks about like you need these physical traits, which I think you do need if you want to build around a guy. But in terms of like finding a guy who's a backup or a stopgap for a couple of years, like a guy with the intelligence and the wherewithal that Alex Smith has, the understanding of defenses, the understanding of offensive play scheme, I think is almost more important now. Like it's been really cool to see this. It's been a cool learning experience for me. And I think that element, it's like I said, it's not going to show up anywhere tangible, but it is so important because everyone else who we just talked about doesn't do those things. And just doing that baseline of quarterback professionalism and study gets you to a place where you can win some games. And I think that's so important to understand for fans, and it's important for me to understand too. And I've been a football junkie for the last 15 years of my life.